Welcome to Creation in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Carl Ball, founder and director of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. The title to today's program is, Let's Review the Facts. There are certain data that literally has been removed from texts, from academic consideration. We're in a state of affairs that needs to be honest in its exploration, in its research, and honest in the communication of what the data really are. We're talking about creation versus evolution, or if we're talking about evolutionary theory being taught in the public arena, it needs to be taught with its strengths and weaknesses, and there are an incredible arrays, series of academic, scientific postures that need to be considered and need to be exposed. If all the facts are known, even the creatures that are supposedly incredibly brute in their historical placement in the geologic record, the dinosaurs in particular, turn out to be very sophisticated. The Pteranodon is an example of this. The Pteranodon recently has been explored in cranial capacity, and it's been found that the area of the brain that controls flight mechanisms is of a greater percentage than that in bird brains. Therefore, this creature was a superior navigator in the air. In addition to that, Stegosaurus, one of my very favorite dinosaurs, had plates as sophisticated as the ears and the mechanism of our elephants, absorbing and regulating heat for the entire vat body of his great stomach. And then Parasaurolophus has been found to have a mechanism as complicated and as designed as a trombone for various reasons, and I call him the imperial dinosaur because of that beautiful crest. When we look at even the areas in the natural world which supposedly arrived by a process of random evolutionary development, we find that there is an intricate design, a meticulous accuracy, and an exploration of this accuracy within the confines of a beautiful environment, all which had to be designed. Let's review the facts, and when we review the facts, we find that any teaching of life development must consider opposition to, or the negative side, or the weaknesses of naturalistic evolution. Now let me give a definition before inviting our special educational guest today. If we're talking about variation within genetic boundary, commonly called microevolution, that is no problem whatsoever. We all vary. Kinds vary. We have the dog kind, the canine kind, the feline kind, the cats. We have variation that is demonstrated worldwide, but all within the genetic potential of that particular kind. We do not have any scientific evidence whatsoever that that kind can increase the complexity, the genetic complexity, to become another kind. We vary within ourselves. We have all kinds of people, giants, pygmies, all in between, all within the genetic code of humankind. So variation on a horizontal boundary has been demonstrated. That is not the evolution we're talking about. That, commonly called microevolution, is no problem at all. But it's what's called macroevolution, the standard concept of evolution, which in the academic communication arena, different from the academic work in the laboratory and in the field, in the communication arena, evidence for microevolution, variation within genetic kind, is used to support the idea that you can then vary that to arrive at a more complicated, superior life form. That is where education stops and indoctrination sets in. We need to review the facts. And no one better to help me do that than my dear friend, Professor John Heffner. Professor, It is always a pleasure to have you on the program.
It's good to be here again.
Well, you're so well informed. 38 plus years in the public education arena as teacher and professor. Math for most of those, and 14 of those years in the college arena. So yeah, I think you know what's going on.
Well, I hope so, but there's always more to learn, of course. And I think an honest approach to data is the right way to go, and to hear all the data presented. I'm actually proud of Texas because it's been said Texas has the best law of any state, because our science classes presently are required to, the teacher is to guide the student to critique any theory in the science class for its strengths and its weaknesses. And there are those that would censor out that phrase, and the weaknesses.
In fact, not long ago, my wife emailed to me an Associated Press article which stated that even in the great state of Texas, among these teachers and professors, 95% of those who were interviewed who teach science classes were in favor of teaching only strengths of evolutionary theory and refusing to admit any weaknesses of evolutionary theory. How does that strike you as an educator?
Well, it strikes me as censorship. And also it strikes me that when you present merely an edited version of the data that favors a theory while censoring anything that's negative to the theory, that ceases to be real education and becomes indoctrination.
Yes, it does. And I quite often say that ceases to be empirical science, that is science researched, re-researched in the laboratory in the field, ceases to be empirical science using the scientific method, and becomes imperial science, mandated because of an administration that has an agenda and an ulterior motive involved, and that essentially is to present naturalism, atheistic naturalism, as the only explanation for life origins.
Well, and that's true, and the public needs to understand there's a difference between origin science and operational science.
Yes.
Operational science gets us the space shuttle, cell phones, microwave ovens, better cars, better medicines, and those things. Those things can be demonstrated, they can be repeated, they can be tested, they can be observed. None of which is true with origin science. So if they're going to bring that into a science classroom, which really is a philosophical position to be argued, that no one's ever seen happen. There's no eyewitness accounts, there's no written records of eyewitness accounts, no photographs of evolution, and et cetera, then it becomes clear that it is a belief system about the unobserved past. And so if you're going to bring one in, then you need to allow others to come in, and certainly the dominant one in the culture. Now, that statistic you cited of 95% of professors only want the strengths pointed out and not the weaknesses, well, I want to brag on those 5%, got guts enough in such a hostile environment to stand up for, you know, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
That's
and I think our kids are worthy of that.
They certainly deserve exposure to the weaknesses of evolutionary theory. And we're not saying that in the public classroom we should come in with a religious concept.
No.
We're simply saying that the facts, let's review the facts.
Exactly.
The facts should be taught. And the strengths of evolutionary theory should be taught, because there's a tremendous appeal to the naturalistic mind. But it should not stop there. That's indoctrination if it stops there. Its weaknesses should also be exposed, and the student should make up his own mind.
Exactly. And contrary to what maybe many people think and some professors allege, we're not necessarily advocating that full-fledged creation be brought into the classroom. I don't know that if you haven't studied all the ins and outs of that you would do a good job. But
that's
I do
correct,
think
not qualified.
That you certainly owe it to the student to present any weakness as well as any strength. And the framers of that rule in Texas TEKS, T-E-K-S, Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, it's listed there. Now again, there are those that want to pull it out, but for now it's there. They certainly had that in mind. And I still have a question that I haven't had answered yet. I asked the State Board of Education, I said, what's wrong with telling kids the truth?
Certainly.
There's nothing wrong with telling them the truth.
And by telling them the truth, again, we want to emphasize to this global audience